Welcome, dear believers and skeptics alike, to Rational Revelations, where a former believer delves into the realm of faith, spirituality, and the art of discerning truth in a world filled with diverse religious claims. We'll embark on a thought-provoking journey through the landscape of belief and skepticism and the methods we employ to navigate this intricate terrain. On today's subjects, we will be discussing Pascal's wager, gumballs, and how it relates to religion. Yes, I know I deliberately worded it in such a way to make you curious, and perhaps you would stay a while and listen. First, we'll start off with the gumball analogy, as it ties into the Pascal's wager, and you can get an idea of my own beliefs. What is the gumball analogy? Well, it is a thought experiment that is used in discussions about the concept of belief. One such version goes like this. Imagine you and I are in a room with a large jar of gumballs, and you are asked to guess does this bowl have an even or an odd number of gumballs in the jar, without being able to count or investigate the jar. I will go first, and I'll assert that I believe that it must be an even number. I turn to you and say, do you believe me that it's an even number? The intellectual, honest answer would be, no, you do not believe me. I reply to you, then you must believe that it is an odd number. You say, well, no, I don't have enough evidence to believe that it's an odd number either. So what do you believe then? With the lack of evidence and support of either case, you would have to say the thing that most humans are uncomfortable of saying, and that is, I do not know. Now, admittedly, the first time that I've heard this explanation, it wasn't explained very well, and I didn't get it the first time I heard it. So I'm going to break it down, this analogy, and I would like for you to participate wherever you are. I'm going to ask you two questions directly. So with the regards to this jar of gumballs that you can see but you cannot investigate, my first question to you is, do you know for a fact that there is an even number of gumballs in the jar? Second question, do you know for a fact that there is an odd number of gumballs in the jar? Both answers would and should be no. So the honest answer is that you do not know. But now, if I tell you that I believe it's an even number, and I ask you if you believe me that it's an even number, you would say, no, you don't believe me. But this does not mean that you believe that the opposite is true. Just because you are not convinced of a proposition to be true does not entail that you believe that the proposition represented to you is false or that the opposite is true. Due to the lack of evidence to support either case, the intellectual honest thing to say is that you do not know what the answer is. This is my own personal belief in relation to a God's existence. I do not believe, or I am not convinced that there is a God, but I don't have any evidence to believe that the opposite is true either. So my answer is that, well, I do not know. I am not convinced. The main issue is that arguments for the existence of a God is, well, flawed. The vast majority of people assume that claims are evidence, but these claims, they do not stand up to scrutiny or to a standard of methodology that qualifies as a reliable form of evidence. This might be a surprise to most Christians, but the Bible is not evidence. It's the claim. And at best, it contains anecdotal evidence, being just stories being told and retold. This, however, relies on people not to be biased, which all people are. It relies on subjective interpretations of events. It relies on people being told a story and remember it perfectly to retell it in the same way it was told to them. And well, this does not correlate with our reality. But I digress. But now on to Pascal's wager. Now, Pascal argues that humans are faced with a decision of whether to believe in a God or not to. He posits that we cannot know for certain whether a God exists, agnosticism. However, he suggests that we must make a choice. Either we believe in a God or we believe in no God. Pascal argues that If we believe in a God and God does exist, you gain eternal happiness, heaven. If you believe in a God and he does not exist, you lose relatively little, earthly pleasures. Conversely, if you do not believe in a God and he does exist, you stand to lose eternal happiness or you go to hell. If you do not believe that a God exists and he does not exist, you gain relatively little or nothing. Pascal's wager concludes that it is a rational choice to believe in a God because the potential benefits, eternal happiness, outweighs the potential costs, your earthly pleasures of believing in a God. He argues that it is a far safer bet to believe in a God, even if the existence of a God cannot be proven or disproven. Well, on the face of it, folks, we don't need to discuss anything any further. It's like he makes us a point. I mean, you stand to gain heaven. And at worst, if you are wrong, you don't stand to lose much at all. A little bit of earthly pleasures, but that's it. It's a no-brainer. But hold on. There are several counter-arguments and criticisms against Pascal's wager, and here are some of the main objections. Multiple gods. Pascal's wager assumes it's a binary choice between believing in a Christian God and not believing in any God at all. However, there are numerous gods and belief systems throughout history and cultures. The wager doesn't provide guidance on which God to believe in. It does not take into account your geographical place of birth, since if you were born in India, you would most likely believe in Hinduism. His argument only takes into account the place that you were indoctrinated in. If you choose your Christian God, you could end up in a Hindu hell when you die. Not to mention Islam, Sikhism, or Buddhism, or the other thousands of Christian denominations that within themselves, even though they are based on Christianity, they differ so much that if you chose the wrong one, you still might not get into heaven, because of the salvation process differs greatly in between the different teachings. Another criticism is feigned belief. Well, critics argue that if you chose to believe in God solely on the bet to gain the rewards that could possibly be given to you and also just to avoid the punishment, this belief might not be genuine or sincere. Such a feigned belief might not be acceptable to an omniscient God. A question is to you then, do you think you would be able to trick this all-knowing God into believing that you sincerely believed and you were not just believing for the sake of not wanting to potentially burn in a hell? Another criticism is subjective belief, as belief is not always a matter of choice. People cannot simply decide to believe something because it is advantageous. Belief is often based on one's personal experience and evidence and understanding, which can't always easily be manipulated. I have pretty much a whole episode dedicated to this subjective belief and how we cannot just believe things that we are told, but we have to be convinced of it. But I'll cover that at a later episode. Another concern was ethical concerns. Some argue that, Pascal's wager can lead to some unethical behavior. If one believes they can escape moral consequences by believing in God, they might feel justified in immoral actions as long as they maintain a belief. Alternatively, although not directly related, but case in point would be people who convert to Christianity later in their lives, or a person that led a life of crime, murder, and sexual assault of adults and minors, not just gravely affecting the victims, but also affecting the families of the victims. That can lead, in some cases, that the victims and or the family members take their own lives because of the immense suffering caused by the physical and the mental harm inflicted by this person, only for them to convert to Christianity at the age of 70 and then to die 5 years later, reaping all the benefits of heaven even though their actions were completely heinous for most of their lives. What we can take away from this belief system is that you need to ask forgiveness from God, and really, that's all that matters. Never mind the people who you've affected throughout your life and how badly your actions have affected them. As long as you can say sorry to God, you never need to actually speak or attempt to amend or reconciliate with your victims of your heinous actions because Jesus paid for your sins. I'll put it in another way. If you steal all of my life savings for retirement and 20 years later you ask for forgiveness from God and you get it, tell me, how does this compensate me for the lack of my retirement funds? How does this compensate me, the victim? According to God, it only matters if you ask forgiveness from Him. But me, without retirement funds, cannot afford food or even basic medical treatment. But it's all okay for you, but not so much for me. Pascal's wager is a fallacy. It's a false dichotomy. The wager presents this option one or option two, but that isn't true. There are many options in between. Being that it's inherently fallacious to argue in this way, this argument should have never been made public, and a lot of people use it to argue for the reason to believe in a God. But it's a fallacious argument. It's not a good argument at all. Believers often stress the urgency of making a decision to believe in a God. This pressure can be linked to the limited time offer. You must believe the number of sweets or gumballs in the jar are even, or dire consequences will await you. Your house will burn down, or your family will suffer. The question of God's existence only becomes significant when you give it importance. Without these pressure tactics, many would simply defer judgment, seeking verifiable, repeatable, logically sound evidence before accepting or rejecting the idea of a God. You probably don't believe that unicorns exist, but nobody is putting pressure on you. Nobody's saying you will suffer for eternity if you do not believe that unicorns exist. You've probably not even made up your mind. Yes, most likely they don't exist, but you cannot say for certain that they don't exist anywhere in the universe. And thus, you defer up until the point when somebody can prove to you that unicorns do exist. You will just sit back and await the evidence to support the claim. Unless I can convince you that you will burn in this one specific hell if you do not believe. But you won't be afraid of the Hindu hell, as they certainly do not fear your hell. If God wanted you to know it exists, it's claimed to be all knowing, so it would know exactly what would convince you personally. The argument against this is, well, it's not yet your time, or God hasn't contacted you, but He will at some point. This is difficult to believe since I reject this proposition on the grounds of that it doesn't mirror our shared reality. Millions of people have lived and died without the knowledge of Christianity, and many still do. Maybe in a little echo chamber where you only come across people with your similar belief, that you can convince yourself and others that this is true. But ignorance in a world with so much information at the disposal of so many is no longer an excuse to use. Well, what is the takeaway from all of this? Well, simply put, propositions presented to you are not always so clear cut and upfront as what it might first appear. Well, you would say, well, obviously everybody knows that. Yes, true. But my point is that when it comes to the really, truly, potentially life and afterlife altering questions, are you really doing your due diligence on the matter? Investigating a question like, what's for dinner tonight does not warrant to contemplate the matter and the effects of it, but the potential for eternal damnation? Pascal's wager, on the face of it, seems to be a logical proposition with an easy, straightforward answer. Just believe, for it's the safe option. But once you actually investigate what's being proposed, it quickly becomes apparent the very important details that are being omitted. More so is, how do you justify your belief or your non-belief in something? Put differently, why do you believe or you don't believe? Do you even know? Have you taken a stance on the matter through authority and cultural inheritance? Yes, the people telling you what you should believe. Or have you come to your own conclusion on the matter? By your own conclusion, I mean, are you informed enough to even make a decision? And who gave you the information that you have? This reminds me of a quote that I saw. Reading the Bible is the cause of atheism. Letting someone read the Bible to you is the cause of religion. This has some truth to it. Refrain from doing what I did in the past, and that was to be quick to answer questions. That is potentially very important. Almost always, when I am asked a question or I ask a question to myself, what is my reason for believing X? And X could be anything. Almost always, my intuitive response to the question is not always the real reason why I believe in X. Most of the time, when delving into the reasons for my belief, I find that, well, I still hold the belief in X, but I have a more truthful or meaningful reason for believing it, or I find that I have no good logical reason to believe X in the first place. Within the last year or so, I have changed my mind on so many opinions that I've held before, be it through my intuition or just through complete ignorance, by just starting the question with, what is my logical reason justification for my belief? It's human nature to want answers to questions, and it's human nature that when we lack knowledge surrounding the subject, we tend to just make stuff up so that we don't have to feel that uncomfortable feeling with not knowing. It comes down to the individual to decide, am I just going to accept what's being handed to me or what seems intuitive, or am I going to find out for myself? What will you decide? When it comes to, does a God exist? Well, I don't know. A God could exist. Keep in mind that that's hundreds of billions of different versions of a God that could exist. But when it comes to the claims made on behalf of a Christian God, there are many things that stand in opposition to the belief of that God's existence. Well, that's it for me, folks. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please take some time to reflect. Well, right after this quote from an online philosophy course, everyone has the right to their own opinion, but you have no right to ask others to take interest in your opinions unless you can back them up with decent arguments.